The Pokemon TCG is run by big multi-prize Pokemon, and it's been like this for quite a while now. We've seen many decks that have just won many tournaments because they have more HP than others. For example, look at Mega Absol. Mega Kangaskhan and Absol just have high amounts of HP and are basic Pokemon, and you just slap them down, and it's difficult for your opponent to actually deal with. The Pokemon TCG has just become a lot faster, as if you knock out 2 Megas, you take 6 prize cards, meaning you win the game because, well, you need 6 prize cards to win a game. However, if we go back in time, further, there we go. Back to the first set, there was no 2-prize Pokemon. In fact, for the first few years of Pokemon TCG, there was only 1-prize Pokemon. And that's the topic of today's video, 1-prize decks. I think 1-prize decks are some of the most fun in the game, because you essentially just get to play the game for longer, right? Your Pokemon only worth 1 prize card, meaning your opponent has to knock out 6 of them. And if you're able to just 2-shot your opponent's Megas, well, usually you'll be winning. However, there is a problem. Because these Pokemon are worth 1 prize card, usually that means they will have less HP, and if they are dying every single turn, sometimes it is difficult to consistently chain these 1 prize attackers. So let's take a look at what I think are the best 1 prize decks in the Pokemon trading card game post-rotation. Starting off, we've got Barbaracle box fighting guys and stuff with friends. So this deck is honestly one of my favorites. I've been trying to make this deck work for a very long time. This is not my list. I will leave a link to all of the lists in the description down below. And also smash like. Yes, you Timothy. I know you're watching my video. Anyway, this deck is a prime example of 1-prize decks. You have a energy acceleration engine which powers up multiple different attackers, and then you also have a 1-prize draw engine in the Solrock and the Lunatone. So if you don't know what Solrock and Lunatone does, if you have both of them in play, Lunacycle can discard a basic fighting energy card from your hand and draw 3 cards, which is just really strong. And then Solrock, if you have, the Lunatone in play, you can use for 1 energy, 70 damage. And that is really good, because a lot of these lower HP Pokemon that evolve into bigger Pokemon, such as Dreepies that evolve into Dragapults, which is, the most popular and best deck in the game right now, it has 70 HP, and Solrock can just deal with that. So it is a really good early game attacker that puts pressure onto your opponents, and if you go second, you can be swinging from as early as turn 1. Another really popular card, I wouldn't really say deck, card in the format is Tealmouse Gogapon. It is seen across many decks, the main one being Slopbox, I guess that's the name it has adopted now, I'm not too sure why, but Slopbox, Terrorbox, and also the Arboliver and Meganium deck. So that is a 210 HP grass Pokemon, which honestly isn't that easy to deal with this deck, as usually you are swinging, your damage output is 170 with Okidogi, but we will get to Okidogi very shortly. So Moltres is in this deck as well, to kind of combat that and able to, knock out these grass Pokemon. So usually these 1-prize decks will have a bunch of tools that are really good at countering specific things in the meta, because they aren't powerful on their own, but when you put them all together, they are quite strong. And this is one of those kinds of ideas. You've got Solrock for, these lower HP Pokemon, then you've got Moltres for a specific card in the format. But what is, in this deck that can deal with everything else that isn't a grass type or a really squishy lower HP Pokemon? Well, your main attacker is Okidogi. Okidogi has 130 HP and does 70 damage for 2 energy. Yeah, it's not good. In fact, it does the same amount of damage as Solrock for 1 more energy. So double the cost and plus 0 damage. But there is a big but. It probably has a big but as well, look at this guy. But regardless, it does have an ability, unlike Solrock. Its ability is Adrena Power, and if you know abilities that start with Adrena are usually going to be broken, and we'll get to another one very shortly. So Adrena Power says if this Pokemon has any dark energy attached to it, it gains 100 health and also 100 extra damage. That means if this Pokemon has a fighting energy, which you play 9 of, and a prism energy, which counts as any energy when attached to basic Pokemon, it essentially has 230 HP and deals 170 damage for 2 energy, which is just really good. If you're playing against Mega Kangaskhan, you're one-shotting Mega Kangaskhan and it's not one-shotting you. Mega Kangaskhan is worth 3 prize cards. You're worth 1. On top of that, Dragapult's Phantom Dive only deals 200 damage. It's not even one-shotting your Okidogi. In fact, dealing over 200 damage is just not easy in the current meta. A lot of these decks that were able to swing for these higher numbers have been rotated, and if they are able to swing for these higher numbers, well, usually they're worth a lot more prize cards. In fact, if we take a look at what is the, right now, quick quiz, what is the Pokemon that does the most damage in the current format and is the most common? It's probably the most common deck in the format. Yep, it's Lucario. Lucario is, however, worth 3 prize cards. It does 270 damage, but is worth 3 prize cards. And it has 340 health. What does that mean? Well, it means we two-shot it, because we deal 170 damage, and 170 times 2 is 340, meaning we one-shot that guy. So this is a really good card. And then on top of that, we have Blood Moon Ursaluna, and if you guys are fans of Tim Danklin, which YouTube loves to tell me that all of my fans also watch Tim Danklin, because fair enough, he is an amazing YouTuber, you will all know what Blood Moon Ursaluna does. Well, it does 100 damage, plus 30 damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. That means if you smack something with a Soul Rock for 70 damage, and then you go in with the Blood Moon Ursaluna, you're essentially doing 310 damage plus that 70 from the Soul Rock originally. You're one-shotting anything in format basically in 2 turns, right? Well, I guess it's not really one-shotting, but it's like, you know, you're doing a lot of damage, right? And you do have a little bit of sustain and heal from the other Adrena ability, Adrena Brain, the one that is a lot more common in the current format, and arguably the best Pokemon in the format right now as well. Adrena Brain, if this card has a Dark Energy attached to it, you can move 30 damage from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon, and it's just really good. It's good for keeping your guys alive. And yeah, that's basically the deck. It's just a bunch of really strong Pokemon on their own, and when you put them all together, it is really good. And then it's all tied together with the Barbaracle, which is able to, you know, power up energy onto these Okie Dokies, meaning you can chain them together. Because as I said before, the main problem with these one-price decks is chaining these attackers, and Barbaracle looks to fix that problem. On top of that, we have a interesting A-spec, Legacy Energy, which turns our 1 prizes into 0 prizes. If our opponent knocks out a Pokemon that has Legacy Energy attached with damage, they take 1 less prize card. And since we don't play a single 2-prizer, well, yeah, they're all worth 0 prize cards. So imagine you're using Moltres, knocking out an opposing Teal Mosk Ogerpon for 2 prize cards, and then they go ahead and knock it out for 0. Ugh. Not a great trade if you ask me. Moving on, we've got another really enjoyable deck. I feel like I'll be able to say this for all of these decks. They're all really fun and really enjoyable, and I think that is the main reason that they are so popular, because it's really fun. It's just, you know, the stability is a little bit lower, and when we're talking about stability, this is definitely one of the decks that I would argue has the least amount of stability. So this is Slowking. Slowking is a pretty interesting Pokemon with a pretty interesting attack. Its attack doesn't actually do any damage. In fact, it discards the top card of your deck. But if it discards a Pokemon, non-rulebox Pokemon, so no EXs or Vs allowed, you use that Pokemon's attack. And that is tied in with some really interesting attacks, such as Kyurem. Kyurem has an attack that is 5 energy, water, water, metal, metal, colorless. You are never powering that up on its own. And it does 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. It can just board wipe your opponent. And that's exactly what it does. You can seek inspiration, and if you discard the Kyurem, you do 110 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. But how do we, you know, get Kyurem to the top of the deck? Well, we have Academy at Night, which, once during our turn, it's a stadium, first of all, and once during our turn, it lets us put a card from our hand to the top of the deck. So the idea is we have Slowking inactive with 2 energy, we have like a Pokepad or something to go ahead and grab Kyurem, we have the stadium in play, and we're able to just put it on the top of the deck, and bam! There goes our opponent's board state. And you obviously have a bunch of other attackers, such as the Conkeldurr, which does 250 damage. We have Clefable, which just copies one of our opponent's active attacks. We have Spectria, which is a little bit worse than Kyurem. In fact, I don't really know why they run to the Spectria. I guess it's just to get through Shaman and stuff. And then one of the funniest ones is Annihilate, and it just kills both active Pokemon. That's it. You're both dead. And remember what we said? We're worth 1 prize card. So if our opponent's active Pokemon is Mega, yeah, bye. Pretty damn good. Yesterday I was streaming, and this is the deck that I was playing a lot of, and I was able to get turn 2 Trifrost 3 games in a row. It is incredibly strong. However, what do you do after that? And that was the problem I was finding. So this deck includes Power Glass, and I think Power Glass is just a really good card because it allows you to attach to the Slowking again and be able to, you know, kind of just set it up on the following turn. Obviously, this deck does play quite a few other 2 prizes because it does need a little bit more support, and it doesn't have the fighting draw engine as the other one did. But this deck is still really good. It's super consistent when you have Mega Kangaskhan and Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking, which can just find you whatever card, literally 2 of them, and when you have probably the best card in the game, Secret Box as well, you can set up quite consistently. And then you have the best energy in the game as well that isn't an A-spec, Telepathic Energy, which if you attach it to one of your Psychic Pokemon, you can search your deck for 2 basic Psychic Pokemon and put them on your bench. That just means you spend a lot less time having to use Pokepads to set up, and you get to use your Pokepads more to the mid-game to actually find your attackers and your Slowkings. So this deck is really good. In fact, out of all of them, I think this one is my favorite. It just has, you know, that toolbox kind of vibe. Our next deck, however, has absolutely 0 toolbox kind of vibe. This is Alakazam. Alakazam is a deck that is synonymous with one thing, and that's a lot of damage. So Alakazam has a singular attack, and it is very simple. It does 20 damage, or 2 damage counters, 2 damage counters for each card in your hand. If you have 10 cards in your hand, you're dealing 200 damage. If you have 15 cards in your hand, you're doing 300 damage. If you have 20 cards in your hand, you're knocking out anything in the game. And this deck is really good at drawing as many cards as possible. So this list doesn't actually include it, but there is a Genesect in the current format, which I think is really good for Alakazam. I think it is definitely needed, because the main way people disrupt you in the current meta is with Unfair Stamp, and with Genesect that turns off your opponent's ace-specs, meaning you don't get Unfair Stamped. And I think that is pretty damn good, because a lot of decks don't run Judge. In fact, a lot of decks only run Unfair Stamp as their, like, kind of, disruption. And it is quite funny to me that you'll notice that every single one of these one prize decks we are looking at today play a different ace spec, because they don't really have this stability that these other, 2 prize decks have. Dragapult is very simple. It has that stability, has a built-in draw engine, it knows what it wants to do, and it needs disruption, so they play Unfair Stamp. Same as like most other decks in the format. They all need Unfair Stamp. But one prize decks, they don't, because they need to, kind of catch up with consistency, because that is definitely where they struggle the most. So Alakazam is very simple. The idea is you evolve into Kadabra, which draws you +2 cards, then you evolve into Alakazam, which draws you 3 cards. Every time you use the Dunsparce's ability, you draw 3 cards as well and shuffle it back in the deck, so you kind of just set up another one on the following turn, or just multiple in the same turn, and just draw like a bunch of +3 cards. And then you have other cards which just get you multiple cards in your hand. Dawn is essentially able to get +2 cards as well, because you trade your 1 card in your hand for 2 more cards in your hand, and if those 2 cards in your hand is like an Alakazam, then you're drawing another +3, and then if it's a Dunsparce, you're drawing another you just get a lot of cards. It's very simple. You get a lot of cards, and you deal a lot of damage. And the tools you play are Lucky Helmet, which is whenever the Pokemon is knocked out, you draw more cards. Your ace spec draws you cards. And it is a psychic Pokemon and a psychic, deck. That means it is able to abuse telepathic energy. However, if you do notice, a lot of these Pokemon have really low and squishy HP, so usually they will fold to Dragapult and Dusknoir. So we do play the Psyduck for, the Dusknoirs and stuff, Shaman for, like, Ogreponds and Starmies and stuff, and also Battle Cages for all the Munkidori damage and Phantom Dive damage and Dusknoir stuff. So it is a very, strong deck. However, it does still have weaknesses, and that is a singular Jamming Tower kind of puts his deck to bed, right? Single Jamming Tower, Dusknoir. If you don't Psyduck in play, you're just losing the game, unfortunately. But this deck is really fun. It is arguably the most fun because it just draws you a lot of cards, and I know a lot of people just love drawing cards. So if I was trying to introduce someone to this game right now, I would probably have them play some version of Alakazam, because it is pretty cool. Whereas Alakazam loves to draw a lot of cards, this deck loves to discard a lot of cards. No, we are not talking about Goldengo, what makes you say that? We are talking about Honchkrow, or Team Rocket's Honchkrow to be specific. So this deck has a very, very cool little attack. Honchkrow has an attack for 2 colorless energy, which is called Rocket Feathers, and you may discard any amount of Team Rocket's supporters in your hand and deal 60 damage in this way. So if you discard 6, you're doing 360, which is basically knocking out anything in the game, and that is kind of the sweet spot number, that 360, right? So 6 supporters, and bam, you kind of get rid of a lot of things, right? And you do play a lot of supporters. In fact, 4, 8, 12, 16, 19. You play 19 supporters, and you also play Miracle Headset to get 2 supporters back into your hand, essentially playing 21 supporters in a you can discard 21 supporters in a single game, is what I'm trying to get at, right? But what happens when you run out of all your supporters? What happens if you prize like 6 supporters and you've discarded the rest? What happened now? Like, do you just lose? No, you use a card that does damage for each of your supporters in your discard pile, and that is Porygon 2. So Porygon 2, what it does is 20 damage for each supporter in your discard pile. So if you have 10 supporters in your discard pile, we're doing 200 damage, which is pretty good, right? However, we're playing 19 supporters, so it's usually going to be more, and if there's 15, you're doing 300 damage. 16, you're knocking out Dragapult. So it does have a really good attack as well. However, its attack cost is 3 colorless energy. That is quite a lot of energy, right? How do we power up these, Rocket Feather 2 colorless energy, Arcommand 3 colorless energy? Well, it's because our energy is the special energy. Team Rocket's energy counts as 2 of Dark and Psychic, I think. Doesn't really matter because it's colorless in this deck. So it powers up our Rocket's Honchkrow in a single attach, and our Ignition energy also powers up our I was going to say Rocket Honchkrow in a single attack, but it also powers up Arcommand, and you don't really have to rely on Arcommand that much. It's much more of like a closer attack, meaning you only have to attach to it once, usually, but you do have to kind of chain attacks on Rocket Honchkrow. That is why we are running 8 energy, and it's just nice, because you can just attach, attack, and forget about it, right? Next turn you'll do the same thing, attach and attack. And this entire deck is built in a way that it just all works together, right? You have Team Rocket's Ariana, which in my opinion is like the main engine of the deck. It draws a lot of cards. It draws until 8 if you only have Rocket's Pokemon in play, which is really good, because then you also have a stadium which says if you played a supporter, Team Rocket supporter specifically, on that turn you get an extra 2 cards, meaning you're essentially drawing till 10 cards. Then you have Team Rocket's Transceiver, which can go ahead and search out for more supporters, right? Then you have Roto Stick, which looks at the top 4 cards of your deck and puts any amount of supporters you find there into your hand. You have Pokepad, which finds your Pokemon, and it's just really good, right? And then you have Pheasantipede towards the end of the game to just draw you some extra, nice extra cards. And then, you might be thinking, well, there's no disruption in this deck. Sometimes, these one-price decks do need disruption, and none of these one-price decks have been playing disruption. So this is where it's very different. This is the only one-price deck that leans really heavily into disruption, and it's the only deck in format, I think, that plays 4 disruption cards. So Team Rocket's Archer is a really good card as well here. It says if one of your Team Rocket's Pokemon were knocked out on the previous turn, you may play this card. You shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 cards, while your opponent does the exact same thing, but only draws 3. So it's essentially Marnie, if you think about it, or it's like Unfair Stamp, but a little bit worse on a supporter instead of an ace spec, which is, pretty cool as well. And then on top of that, you do play Guzma, which is one of the best cards, in fact, probably the best Gust card in the game ever, which was you switch one of your Pokemon and your opponent switches one of their Pokemon and you choose which one it is. So it does have boss's orders as well, right? So if at the end of the game you aren't able to, hit that 360, you only have like 180 damage or 240 damage in your hand, you can use your Rocket's Giovanni, grab a Meowth, and knock that guy out real quick, right? So it is a very synergistic deck. I think it is really good. I don't know if synergistic is a word, but it makes sense here. This is one of the times where that word just makes sense. This deck is really fun as well. And it's just, out of all of them, I think this is probably the best one. I think this one is probably the best one when it comes to just having a good matchup against a lot of different things. Because Alakazam, don't get me wrong, Alakazam is good, but it does kind of fold to, those energies that prevent them from doing effective attacks, or just, a single Articuno with Repelling Veil, because it says prevent all effective attacks done to your damage, done to your basic Team Rocket's Pokemon. So, if you slap down a single one of these, your opponent kind of folds. They don't really do much about that, right? They can't attack it. So yeah, very interesting deck here, and probably my favorite. My favorite in consistency terms. I think Slowking, when it works, and it's very fun. This one is still really good. And our last one is one that everyone is familiar with. In fact, they got second place pre-rotation at the Seville, I think it was a Seville Regional Champion special event. Only losing that to Gardevoir, so that's dead. Thank fucking goodness. She's gone. But yeah, this deck is pretty... The idea is pretty simple. You have an ability called Festival Lead, which says if you have Festival Grounds in play, you can attack twice. And then if you have a Pokemon with Festival Lead as the ability in your active position, you can use Boom Boom Groove, which lets you search your deck for any card. And that effect does stack. That means if you have multiple Thwackies out with a Diplin, Goldeen, or Seaking in the active, seeking these balls, then you can search out for multiple cards. Right, and it is just really powerful because it is one of the only decks other than Terra decks we can just cherry pick whatever you want, whenever you want, throughout the entire game. And you might be thinking, well, its damage output isn't great. It only does 100 damage because the attack says 20 damage for each of your benched Pokemon, right? And that maxes out 100. But remember what I said, you can attack twice. That means now that's all of a sudden 200 damage. But let's say that's not enough. You want more, right? You can be greedy. Why not? We can all be greedy once in a while. What if we want to knock out something like an Ogerpon or a Pheasantipede, which has 210? We miss by 10. Oh no. Or do we? Well, with Brave Bangle, right, this says if it is attached to a non-rulebox Pokemon, so any of our Pokemon, because we can play rulebox Pokemon in this deck, you do 30 more damage to rulebox Pokemon, so like if Pheasantipede. And not only do you deal 30 more damage, you might be thinking, alright, cool, we do 230 damage, right? But what if I wanted to knock out something that had like 240 damage or 250 damage? Hell, even 260 damage. Well, because you attack twice, you essentially apply Brave Bangle twice. So you're doing 100 damage base damage. Then the plus 30 means you're doing 130 damage. And if you have the stadium in play, you're doing another 130 damage, totaling 260 damage. But let's say you want to be the greediest person alive, and there's an opponent's Dragapult in the active position. What happens then? What happens if you are really just one of those greedy people? You need to hit 320 damage. Well, we can then use Kieran, right? And with the Brave Bangle, you're adding 60, right? So that means for both of these attacks, you're doing 160 plus 160 equals 320 knocking out a Dragapult. Bam, there you go. You can't see because my camera's in the way, but that says 320. You do 320. And just for the fun of it, just because why not, our ace spec is max belt. This is maximum power. Now we're getting a little silly. We can deal 150 damage, right? Meaning 300 damage. Or we can do 360 damage because we'll be doing 180 damage each time if we also add the Kieran. That is our max. There is no more greed. Greed, it's finished. Unfortunately, that is our max. 360 damage. If anything has 370 damage. If anything has 370 HP, too bad. You ain't killing that. Greed can't get you there. So this deck is consistent, obviously, because you do have the Boom Boom group, which is probably the best ability in the game when set up. Let's be real. It is just definitely the best ability in the game. Just search your deck for a card. Yeah. You don't have to read it like into the stipulations of like having a bunch of stuff, but this deck is clunky, unfortunately, because it has a lot of moving parts. You know, you need this ability in the active, you need to evolve your Thwackey. Both of these are stage 1 Pokemon, meaning you have to evolve them. Then you also need your stadium to find that. Sometimes might be a bit difficult, and a lot of people are playing multiple stadiums, so you might be losing stadium wars, meaning you have to constantly bump stadiums, and if your opponent bumps a stadium and unfair stamps you, sometimes you just lose, right? And you have Rapska, which is pretty cool. Rapska does prevent damage to the bench, and also like damage counters to the bench, meaning you prevent Phantom Dive and all that kind of stuff. But then you also have Shaman, which does the same thing, a little bit worse though, because it doesn't stop the damage counters. And you have Psyduck, so there's a lot of like support Pokemon, because you know this deck is really squishy. 80 HP is your main attacker. Thwackey only has 100. In fact, your highest HP Pokemon is your Rillaboom, which is only here because you need a way to beat fighting Ogerpon, right? So these are my picks for the best one-price decks. I did not include Crustle because that is not a real deck, and that is cringe as all hell. If you think I'm going to make a video about fun and joyous activities, if you thought I was going to be putting Crab in this deck, in this video, you'd be wrong. In fact, go get yourself checked out mentally if you think Crab is a fun deck. No, it's not. You're just a horrible person. Anyway, that's my picks for the best and most enjoyable one-price decks. If you guys agree, smash like. If you don't agree, go comment and give me engagement so that YouTube pushes the video out to more people, and tell me what deck you think is actually better as a one-prize deck. Oh, actually the best one-prize deck is Lily Clefairy with Lily's Pearl, because then it becomes a one-prizer. Oh yeah, you think you're so funny? Get out of here.